Okay, so here we go. Almost ready to start. I'm having a little getting buggy on me. Okay, got a few people checked in already. Still about a minute to go. Just wait till the top of the hour to start. Okay, let's begin. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. So I chose this topic today because I've just started teaching some Pali classes to some people here. So I'm thinking about the language a bit. I've noticed over the last 20 years, there's been a widening, a broadening of people's interest in Buddhism. At one time, most of the Westerners who took to Buddhism, they just wanted to learn the meditation techniques and nothing more. But I'm seeing now more and more people are interested in reading the suttas, and even quite a few people are beginning to dip their toe in the waters of studying Pali. I don't think it's absolutely necessary, to know Pali. It it is very uh, useful. It's a really good step in your depth of understanding of the Buddhist teachings. Because even though there are really excellent translations out there, it's just a matter of fact that no translation, even the very best translation conceivable, will ever be exactly the same as what was said in the original language. This is because no two languages are fully uh, isomorphic. They don't map into each other completely. And this is especially the case when we're dealing with an ancient language like Pali and a modern language like English or French. Being able to read Pali, and it's even just inspiring to be able to understand the teachings in the original language to even a small degree. Short of studying the language fully, I think it is necessary to pick up uh, a good vocabulary of the main technical terms, because so many of the words in Pali do not have exact translations into English, because Pali is a language that is tailored for the Buddhist teachings. It's rich in um, technical terms relating to meditation, relating to the mind, states of mind, and so on, psychological terms. That is really not. Well, people are telling me the audio is bad. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. We just keep going and hope it improves. I don't know if there's anything I can do. Okay. Where was I? I was talking about picking up vocabulary. Words like dukkha is usually translated suffering, And that's many commentators have noted that that's inadequate as a translation and is misleading. And there is no single English word that fully captures all the nuances of dukkha. So you really should learn what these kind of words mean in their original context. Um, another word that I think has been badly mistranslated, and not too many people have picked up on this one, is samadhi, translated as concentration. I have found as a practical matter when I'm teaching meditation that common mistake meditators make is to try too hard, in a sense, like they're pushing the mind. And this comes from the idea of concentrating. Whereas samadhi is not concentration. It's a closer translation would be stability. It's stillness of mind. And there are many other terms that like that, in which there's either the standard translation is misleading, or there is no single word that captures the nuance of the Pali. So it would be good to pick up as much vocabulary as you can of the technical terms as a minimum. A good source for that is the uh, Nyanataloka's Buddhist Dictionary, which you can find online in a electronic version. You can also get the booklet form from the Buddhist Publication Society. Nyanataloka's Buddhist Dictionary, which is um, not a complete Pali dictionary, but just the technical terms. And but it's pretty extensive. There's a few hundred terms. Um, so, what exactly is Pali? We can't say accurately that it's the language that the Buddha spoke. Uh, he spoke something probably very close to Pali. The situation in India at his time, in the Ganges Valley in the north of India, where he lived and taught, there were very many languages and dialects, and most of them were what are called Prakrits, which are derivatives of Sanskrit. Sanskrit is the ancient language of the Vedas, brought into India by the Aryans 1,000 years before the Buddha. And at the time of the Buddha, Sanskrit already was a dead language. It was already a language of learning. No one grew up speaking Sanskrit as their native tongue anymore. Sanskrit is an interesting language for linguistics because it's probably the oldest Indo-European language of which we have extensive knowledge. And the grammar is very complex. Pali seems to have been, to some degree, an artificial language, a kind of Esperanto or a lingua franca. When the Buddhist teachings started to become standardized, the various dialects of Prakrits were creating some confusion in trying to standardize the teaching. And the solution was to find a happy kind of medium that everyone could adapt to. So basically, Pali is a kind of simplified Sanskrit. And we see, for example, the orthography, the spelling of words has been simplified. This is why we see in common examples that most people would know. Sanskrit nirvana becomes Sanskrit nibbana. Sanskrit karma becomes Pali kama. That's because consonant clusters were difficult for some speakers of some of the Prakrits. The they didn't occur in all the Prakrits. Consonant clusters being like putting R and M together without an intervening vowel. So the compromise was to elide or smooth the consonant clusters. So karma becomes kama and so on. Also, the grammar is somewhat simplified from Sanskrit. Both Sanskrit and Pali are uh, de- decline languages. Uh, this is a characteristic of Indo-European languages, is that the grammar is structured around declensions, that is, case endings. Anyone who has studied Latin, which I had the misfortune to do when I was in high school, it was back in the ancient times, it was a compulsory subject to study Latin. So this actually, I didn't think it was of any use at the time, but when I came decades and decades later to study Pali, I found it was a big help to at least have been exposed to that grammatical structure. What this means, declensions, is that the endings of the nouns change depending on their role in the sentence. Um, so there are 8 different case endings in Pali. There are 10 in Sanskrit. Uh, this means that you can dispense. English uses prepositions to indicate things that would be uh, indicated by the case ending in Pali. Uh, English still has some trace of declensions. Old English was a declined language, and it's historically most Indo-European languages over time have flattened or lost their declensions, but we still have declined pronouns. Um, the masculine pronouns he, him, his, feminine, she, her, hers. Right. Uh, this uh, is intuitive to English speakers, but if you think about it, it's a declension. If this is the subject of the sentence, we say he did this. If it's the object of the sentence, we say him. I did that to him, right? So Pali is the same idea, but just more complicated and applied to all the nouns. It's occurred to me that expressing the Dhamma in a declined language uh, embeds in the very structure of the language something of dependent origination, because a word by itself uh, is not a standalone unit. It depends on the rest of the sentence to take its final form. So the words are dependent on each other. So if you're going to learn Pali, that's really the first major learning curve difficulty that you're going to face, is to get a handle on declensions. And if you've already dealt with a declined language, you'll find it much easier to get into. It's a different way of structuring the sentence than what we're used to. Um, Pali was originally an oral language only. The written form didn't begin to appear until hundreds of years later. That, as we all probably know, and it's often stated that the canon was passed on orally for the first few hundred years before it was committed to writing, first in Sri Lanka. So what this means in part is that the the language doesn't have a script. It doesn't have an alphabet of its own. So it's can be found in Asia. You can find Pali texts in Siamese script in Thailand, in Sinhalese script in Sri Lanka, and in Burmese script in Myanmar. Um, it's just using a different alphabet. Uh, Probably most of you have seen Pali text in online or in printed in the Western alphabet. This is called the Roman alphabet, and we have had Romanized Pali, as they call it, only since the uh, latter half of the 19th century. It was one of the pioneering efforts of Western scholars of Buddhism to produce Romanized versions of the text and make it more accessible to Westerners, who are already used to the alphabet. There's nothing wrong with doing that because, as I said, Pali doesn't have an alphabet of its own, so we might as well adapt any alphabet to it. One of the difficulties in Romanizing Pali is that there are more letters in Pali than there are in the Roman alphabet. So we've had to indicate or invent ways of representing these extra letters by using what are called diacriticals. You'll see these marks, dots, and lines under or over letters. This is a device to indicate letters that are not found in the Roman alphabet. The pronunciation of Pali is actually, once you learn it, it's actually quite easy because it's uniform. It doesn't change. Unlike English, which has all sorts of oddities and quirks in spelling and pronunciation, Pali is quite standard. If you see a letter, it's always pronounced the same way. So once you get used to it, it's easy to pronounce. The fact of Pali having been originally an oral language also has reflection in the form of the suttas themselves. You see a lot of repetition, repeated phrases with one or two words changed. This is a product of the oral period because it makes it easy to memorize. It's more suitable for oral presentation. The Pali of the commentaries is later, and the language has evolved, and it's actually generally people find it more difficult, the commentarial Pali, because it uses a lot of long compounds, and it's sometimes difficult to parse or break up the compounds. The Pali of the suttas is cleaner in that way. What else to say about it? If some practical advice, if you have the interest and decide you want to begin studying Pali, the very best book that I've seen to start the beginner's Pali is the Pali Primer by Lily De Silva. That's a very good first go. It doesn't go in very deep, but it's easy and gets you started and gives you the basics. If you want to go deeper, the the classic text is A.K. Warder's Introduction to Pali, and that's actually how I started with that book. And I wish I'd known about De Silva before. A.K. Warder's book is excellent, but it's difficult for a beginner. You know, he comes from a very linguistic background, and it gets a bit technical. But if you already have the basics, then it really gets you in and deeper and gives you more of the structure of the language. So I think that's enough. I see there's lots of questions. I'll go now to the questions and see what we have here. Well, what are the advantages of Pali over Sanskrit? Well, it depends what you want to study, what you want to read. If your primary focus is Theravada Buddhism, you have to learn, go with Pali. Theravada Buddhism is entirely in Pali, including the commentaries, the Abhidhamma, everything. But that's all that you'll find in Pali. Sanskrit, there is a wide range of literature in Sanskrit, both Hindu and Buddhist. Sanskrit is somewhat more difficult to learn, and there's also a lot more variance in Sanskrit between the early Vedic Sanskrit and then the various later forms, including what they call Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit, which some of the Mahayana texts are written in. So I think it's a bigger hurdle to really get deep into the Sanskrit. But if you've learned Sanskrit, then learning Pali afterwards is a piece of cake. That's actually, I think, in Western universities, that's often the recommended course of study for scholars of Oriental or Buddhist studies, is to start with Sanskrit and then take up Pali after. Someone asks how they can donate to me or my organization. I'll put the website in the chat. We have a website, arrowriver.ca, and if you go there and under contact, you'll find a button for donate, and you can donate to us that way. And we're a registered charity, so if you're a Canadian, you'll get a tax receipt. Okay, question. When doing Anapanasati, after like half an hour into the meditation, I sometimes feel my head is stiff, like I could feel the hardness of my skull. What could I do to get out of this? I could say two things, two pieces of advice. One is, first of all, is posture. Your head should be relaxed in that you're not forcing your head back, or and you're not drooping it down. It's kind of, the neck is relaxed, so that the head will be very slightly forward. You just find the point where there's no tension in holding the head. The other thing is, in terms of the other piece of advice, is in terms of practice, and I glossed over this in the talk today. I said about mistranslation of concentration. Some people give themselves headaches by taking this idea of concentrating. I think you should approach the meditation in a more open and relaxed manner, When doing anapana, the object is the breath, but don't try and narrow your focus onto the breath. This is where concentration as a translation is misleading. Instead, you should open your mind to the breath. Uh, think of your mind as being relaxed, open, vast, and the breath is filling the mind. Let the breath come to the mind. Um, a visual metaphor would be like a vast cavern that's being filled up by the tides of the sea. Two separate questions. Is learning Pali meritorious? What's the best form of meditation to do while driving? Okay, number one, is learning Pali meritorious? I think it probably is. One of the commentaries actually says that if you learn some memorize Dhamma in Pali and you're reborn into a Dewa realm, that it will come back to you, and you'll have the Dhamma available in the Dewa realm. But I think it is meritorious in the sense that anything you learn in Pali will be Dhamma related, because this is a language is only used for the Pali scriptures. There's no secular literature. There's no novels or histories or essays, other than relating to Dhamma. Pali is entirely related to Dhamma. What is the best form of meditation to do while driving? I wouldn't recommend doing jhana while you're driving. You don't want to go into jhana. I think a kind of relaxed vipassana, and maybe mix that with loving kindness to avoid getting. We can get irritated when we're driving. You get the some idiot pulling out of the parking lot too quickly or whatever. We get irritated and angry. If you just send loving kindness to the other drivers on the road, may you be well and happy. May you get home safely. Next one. I heard the Bodhisattva in one Jataka, after knowing sensual pleasure of kaya for the first time, he decided to kill so that no male would have that pleasure for him. So he is saying that a Bodhisattva is ignorant, does it generate bad karma. I'm not familiar with that Jataka. I don't think that's one in the Theravada canon. But a general point that the Bodhisattva still has ignorance. He's not yet a Buddha. He's on his way to being a Buddha, and the Bodhisattva in the different Jataka stories sometimes acts in an unskillful way. As far as reading the suttas for those who have not learned Pali yet, would you say Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations are good? Yes, I would recommend Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations. I think they're the best available translations. He's a very meticulous scholar. His translations are quite good. And he's translated most of the Nikayas. The only English Nikaya that's translated by somebody else out there commonly is Digha Nikaya by Maurice Walsh. And that translation is okay, but it's not. It's somewhat, in places, it's somewhat less than than literal, because I think Maurice Walsh was trying to produce, a piece of literature. It sometimes took a bit of license to make things a bit more poetic in the English. If we were to speculate that the whole world is truly finite and would end on its own, never to rise again, all remaining meaning suffering and karma, and it would end regardless of individual effort. Further rebirth wouldn't make any sense. Only in an infinitely cyclical world, the whole scope of Dhamma and mindful effort to exit this massive suffering makes sense. The Buddha didn't teach annihilation, yet annihilation is suffering. Why would he be so adamant in a world that all suffering would eventually end on its own? Well, I could say, first of all, that the Buddha himself refused to speculate on the eternity or otherwise of the world. He said that was one of the unanswerable questions, and he said it's sort of useless to speculate because you'll never know. It's something you can't really know. But having said that, the way you phrase it here is pretty much the way the Buddhist tradition after the Buddha approached the problem. And by the time of Buddha Ghosa himself was quite explicit in saying that samsara is beginningless and endless, because it makes a logical sense, as you point out here, with the rest of the Buddhist teaching. How does learning Pali fit into the Noble Eightfold Path? It would be a component of right view. It would be a wisdom, because by approaching closer to the true expression of the Buddha's thought, you're developing right view and wisdom. Would you think the Buddha was multilingual? Is it fair to say that Magadhi Prakrit was his native tongue? Most modern scholars would say that yes, Magadhi, that he spoke Magadhi. It may not have been his native tongue, because don't forget he grew up in the Sakyan kingdom in the far north, and they probably spoke a different dialect, but it was probably a rural dialect, not so useful in the Ganges Valley itself. So he probably did most of his teaching in Magadhi, but it's probably safe to assume that he was knowledgeable about several of the Prakrits and was able to, because he traveled extensively in that culture area. Next, if mind is a general term for cognizance, is the khandha itself falling apart with all other khandhas when the final death takes place upon liberation? Logically, all knowledge would end right then and there. To experience nibbana, must not there be some form of experiencing faculty present? Um, yeah, I would. Again, I often have to repeat this in these discussions. It's not really useful to speculate about nibbana in this kind of a way, to try and nail it down in definitions and formulas. It's beyond reason. It's beyond language. So just try and not go there. How exactly we go about learning Pali language? Acquisition experts talk about comprehensible input, receiving simple input one can understand, and gradually increasing complexity. I think that's where a primer like Lily de Silva's is very useful, because the first few each chapter has exercises translated into Pali and translated into English, and the first few chapters are quite easy, simple sentences, and they get gradually more difficult. And then, when you have some basis in Pali, uh, to try and read texts in Pali and have a translation at hand, and to compare. Um, there's if anyone wants to delve into it, there's a very good which you can find online, very good software tool called the Digital Poly Reader. That besides having it has the whole canon and most of the commentaries, and um, it has a very excellent search engine to find what you're looking for, but also it has a built-in dictionary that you can click on a word and it'll give you the Polytext Society dictionary definition of the word. Um, Probably your best bet if you get far enough that you want to start actually reading text, your best uh, the, the the simplest text would probably be Digha, and the prose sections. Polyverse is more difficult. It's more advanced to try and make sense of polyverse. Um, or the prose sections, narrative sections generally are probably easier. So something like the prose sections of the Jatakas are probably more approachable for intermediate level reader. Do you think it's possible to come to right view without meditation? Um, I don't know how to answer that definitively. I think it'd be extremely difficult, but I don't know if it's impossible. Um, but then you don't know a person who arrives at right view without meditation may have done extensive meditation in their last life. Is there a similarity between Hindu Brahman and Anatta? I assume you mean Brahman. Um, uh, I don't think there is. Only there's kind of a vague family resemblance, but I don't think it's the same thing. Like the idea in of Hindu Brahman is like a big self, that there that our little self, the Atman, is in its deepest nature is equivalent to Brahman, the universal self. Whereas the Buddha's idea is that any concept of self is empty. Are there resources or practices you would recommend to help us understand emptiness? Um, well, in terms of meditation, uh, the Vipassana meditation in any form is is pointing in that direction. Will lead you there eventually. To get a glimpse of emptiness, if you work on the formless meditations, the formless abidings, uh, that can also be helpful. Are there polytexts in Devangiri script? I don't know for sure. I would think there probably is. Um, I wouldn't be. It wouldn't surprise me if somebody had put it into Devangiri script. Uh, uh, I think you would find if you looked at Siamese text, Thai version. It's really the Thai alphabet is really derived from the Indian alphabets, so I think it's not that different. It would probably be easier for someone who's fluent in reading Hindi in Devanagari script than the Siamese alphabet. I ask about meditation because there are some Theravada monks who are claiming the Buddha never taught meditation to someone who is not already a stream venturer. Is that true? No, I don't think that's true at all. it may it may be where that idea comes from is that there is a classification of beings that are called sawaka, the learners, or listeners, literally. But and that is the first three stages of enlightenment: stream enterer, non one return, once returner, and non-returner. They're called sawaka or learners. So, um, but I think that the whole point of the meditation is to get to those stages. So it doesn't seem to make any sense to say that only stream enterers can learn meditation. What did Venerable Mahabua mean when he says, "We then see clearly for ourselves and Didiko, all five khandhas are realities separate from the chitta. This is the third level of separation." Well, this is a Thai forest expression that originally comes from the language used by Ajahn Mun, um, which is based on purifying the chitta. The whole Thai forest practice is centered. This is the central idea: is that purify the chitta, and that uh, the khandhas are mundane or samsaric manifestations. Um, this this is not this is controversial because it's not in agreement with the Visuddhimagga. Some of the Buddhist Publication Society in Sri Lanka, for example, won't publish their texts because they consider them heretics. So I mean, it's all very deep waters. We're going in here talking about the true nature of chitta and so on. Um, the Thai forest approach seems to be very practical. It does seem to work. How can we see anatta and anicca in that? Um, well, we don't really. Uh, well, anatta, you could say, because you don't identify the chitta as a self. Um, but this isn't. But as far as anicca goes, it is different than the Abhidhamma interpretation, which has chitta arising only for a moment, and each chitta is an entirely new arising. Um, it's so those are kind of the two different approaches that are not intellectually compatible. I have thought that the Sarvastivadin version might be a way of reconciling these two views, in that the Sarvastivadins, who hold that past, present, and future all exist, uh, and that the chitta only exists for a moment, but it's a moment outside of time. And the rest of the universe is streaming backwards in time from the future and falling into the past. And the moment it crosses the chitta, we recognize as the present. Are you saying Thai forest takes the chitta to be permanent? Well, I wouldn't say permanent, but uh, they don't take it as synonymous with vijnana. Now, vijnana is they see as samsaric, dependently arisen, rising and falling, whereas chitta is outside of that. But I think it's better to think of it as timeless rather than permanent or impermanent. Okay, so I think we'll stop there for this session, and Thank you all. That was some interesting discussion, and we'll see you again same time next week.